Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as always, welcome to DEscussions, the podcast where we explore the intersection of education, technology, and innovation to spark ideas and conversations that drive meaningful change. I'm Brad Denison, your host and EdTech enthusiast geek, here to connect you with thought leaders and tools that are reimagining the future of learning. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Jeff Marshall, CEO and co-founder of Ovation, a cutting-edge virtual reality platform that's changing how we train for the real world. With a background in immersive tech and a passion for human-centered innovation, Jeff has helped shape Ovation into a leader in XR solutions for communication and leadership development. His team is pioneering the integration of artificial intelligence and extended reality to elevate soft skill training in ways that are scalable, measurable, and deeply human. So for today's episode, we'll explore Ovation's origin story, their vision for the future, including how AI is powering new levels of personalization in VR learning environments. We'll also dig into the balance between soft and hard skills in today's workforce and why immersive technology might be the key to developing confident communicators and effective leaders across education and industry alike. So let's dive in. First, Jeff, welcome to the show, and please let me know, did I miss anything in the intro there?
No, that was great. Thanks, Brad. Happy to be here. Excited to chat.
Wonderful. Well, we can get started then. The first one, it's easy. Let's get started with the origin story. What inspired the creation of Ovation, and how did your own background lead you into the world of immersive learning and soft skills training?
Well, it's it's a bit of a pinball machine. I bounced from one industry totally unrelated to another industry totally unrelated, and finally ended up in VR. But if you rewind the clock to my early teens, I was a huge MMO fan, played a lot of video games, World of Warcraft, EverQuest before that. So I've always been into immersive worlds. And when I first heard about the Oculus Rift development kit, it was a Kickstarter campaign started by a guy named Palmer Luckey. I first heard about it, and I was extremely excited because I thought, oh, wow, I can enter these worlds now. It's not just looking at it on a rectangle at arm's length. I can put a headset on and be in the game. And so that got me excited. It encouraged me to get a headset, and I did in early 2013. And the first application I tried was something called Titans of Space, where you are flying around our solar system. And one of the benefits of the VR here is that you really get a sense of scale because you're sort of flying through the solar system, the planets, the sun, they're all being scaled relative to one another. And it's just so much more impactful to the learning process, I thought at the time, than looking at an image in a textbook, for example. So that's sort of where VR and education for me overlapped. And around the same time, I was getting degrees in journalism and finance. So that's kind of where none of this was VR related. And as part of my journalism degree, I was forced to take a public speaking course as a prerequisite. And I've always been the kind of person that, and there are many of us, who gets absolutely terrified in front of a crowd. Right? I get all red. I flush up. I realize that that's happening, and so it builds upon itself. In some cases, I will forget the words of what I have to say and just stand up there in front of a room, staring blankly ahead. And this is sort of the fear I had about this class. And so, what I did to try to overcome this was rehearse as much as possible the speech that I was going to deliver in class. So I had to deliver speeches to my fellow students 5 times during that class. And I went home. I would tack 8.5 by 11 lined paper on the wall, draw stick figure faces on it, and I would rehearse my speech dozens and dozens of times looking at these lined paper faces. And it was extremely effective for me. I got to the point where I was not only memorizing the words, but also the intonation with which I would say these words in class. And I would stand in front of my students, and I had this unbelievable confidence because I knew I wasn't going to forget what I needed to say. And in fact, it allowed me to start playing around with the speech, going off script, looking at the faces of the students in the crowd, adjusting my speech, etc. And around this time, I was learning how to program and playing around with something called Unreal Engine, which is what you develop VR software in. And I thought, well, wait a second, why don't I, instead of looking at lined paper faces, why don't I put some simulated avatars in a virtual environment, pop on the headset, and look at them instead when I'm rehearsing? And so that was the genesis of the idea for Ovation, and that was back in 2013, right? So it's been a long time. There was also something else that sort of influenced me, an application called Coffee with Friends, that really proved to me that being in a virtual space with another avatar could be compelling and not just creepy, which is what the conventional wisdom at the time was. And so, yeah, I built that proof of concept in 2013, and we've been iterating it ever since.
And I like it because you started with, talking about MMOs, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, right? My brain then goes to things like Second Life that popped up.
Yeah.
And now, like, as somebody who is still an active video gamer, just not as good because I'm getting older and slower with the reactions, right? But it's really interesting to me how many video games now have an avatar lobby for no real good reason aside from the interaction between their users. And so I really like that you took the hobby aspect and you said, well, hey, how can I business this? But you took your basic idea of the stick figures and elevated it through Unreal Engine, and then here you are. So that's a really fascinating journey. And then I'm gonna with the fun question though, did you ever mess with Second Life? Because that's where it was weird.
Yeah, I did. I have played with Second Life. I don't want to, there's Second Life really paved the way for a lot of this stuff in MMOs and in VR. I have huge respect for them and for the founder. But but it's remained a niche, right? It never really became this huge thing. I thought it was going to transition to VR and potentially be the first MMO for VR, and it didn't. So yeah, the huge respect for them, but sadly, it didn't scale up.
And that's it's a fun journey to watch how they grew and how they basically stopped. But so that aside, I apologize for the little caveat there. But so now the question is, let's talk about where you're headed next. As AI and XR technologies evolve, how is Ovation planning to innovate or expand its impact in education and workforce development?
It's a great question. It's funny. Ovation, if you want to go back to the proof of concept being in 2013, started way before AI. We thought AI was going to work, especially in the form that it is now. Right. So we had a lot of time to focus our application on solving essentially two particular problems. And that is helping people overcome fear of public speaking. And the way we did that, of course, is by putting you in a VR headset, putting you in a highly realistic environment, putting realistic avatars in front of you, and getting you used to the experience of having a lot of eyeballs looking at you, right? Being in the spotlight. And if we can induce that anxiety in you while you're in the headset, and nothing bad happens, right? There's this idea of exposure therapy, and you go through that multiple times, and lots of research has supported this. Then you'll be less anxious. You'll have a less fear when you stand up in front of a group of real people. And so that was sort of priority number one with our application. That was sort of the main feature that we promoted. The other is, of course, improving or helping you with the muscle memory involved in delivering a speech, right? You put on the headset, you're in a virtual world that's scaled the same size as the real world. You can walk to the left and right on the stage. You can look over your right shoulder at a projector screen. You can point your virtual laser pointer. Right? And so you can move through the speech, practice it in the same way that I did looking at the lined paper stick figure faces. Right? I can just practice over and over and build up the muscle memory involved in delivering a good speech. So those are the two things we mainly focused on. And when ChatGPT was released in 2022, November of 2022, we were perfectly positioned because we had an application that you could think of was unidirectional, right? You were speaking, but no one was ever speaking back to you, nor did they understand what you were saying, to now solving both of those problems. They can speak back to you. For example, in our application, they can ask questions about the speech that you just delivered. And at the very end, you can get a report generated by AI that looks at the content of your speech, your answers to questions, and in some of our other scenarios, how you contributed to conversations and so forth, and give you very, very useful feedback about that. So really the key for us though was that AI moment, right? It was a good application, but it was quite niche before that interaction, before that AI dialogue. And now that we have that in there, sort of the sky's the limits. We can support all kinds of use cases across higher education and beyond. And we're going to continue pulling on that thread. We're in a great position where every time a new, smarter, faster AI model is released, Ovation gets better because we integrate that model directly into it. Our audience members ask better questions. It doesn't take as long to load them before they ask them. And they can follow instructions in terms of custom role play scenarios you want. So we're really going to sort of ride the AI wave and listen to feedback from customers and say, what do you like? What don't you like? How can we improve it? That kind of thing.
The joke on the internet right now is like everybody that's in an important position of power has got an AI idea, and you had the idea and now you're incorporating the AI into it. And that's really, that's the smart way to go about it. So much applause there.
Thanks.
Real quick reminder for everybody, you're listening to DEscussions. Brad Denison here, hanging out with Jeff Marshall, CEO and co-founder of Ovation. Big fan of these guys. They're AR, XR, and they are dealing with soft skills. We did a lot of looking into companies that do AR, VR here at College of the Mainland. And this was the first one that stood out to me because of the soft skills side of it. So my next question for you is, from your perspective, how should educators or training teams balance soft skill development with more traditional hard skill instruction, especially when using technology like this as a bridge?
It's interesting. As an anecdote, I think the first, let's say, higher ed VR educational software that really was able to scale, let's say, were hard skill nursing simulators. Nursing departments across the country and even the world have benefited from VR applications that help you with the procedure skills in nursing, right? So, how do you have a sterile environment? How do you inject someone with a syringe? If somebody needs a catheter, what are the steps you take to do it properly? Right. So all of these procedural things that nurses need to know and do properly time and time again. And we think of these as hard skill simulators, right? And these applications were very successful in the nursing space, but there was nothing for, okay, how does a nurse talk to a patient, right? A patient walks into a doctor's office, they have some kind of symptoms. How do you help the nurse get better at empathizing with them, gathering as many facts as possible, and potentially providing a diagnosis, or at least gathering enough facts so that you can provide that to the doctor so that they can then provide a diagnosis. And so that's where, and it makes sense that this was the order of things, because these nursing simulators, these procedural simulators, happened before AI dialogue was possible, conversational AI, right? And so now the fact that ChatGPT and others exist and can support AI dialogue, you're now starting to see soft skills simulators, and us, for example, we do support that sort of nursing soft skills through what we call our medical exam scenario. So I think there's space for both of these. We're excited because the nursing schools already have the VR headsets. They're experienced with how to get nursing students in and out of them. And we're basically just coming to them now and saying, hey, you guys have been doing hard skills stuff for a long time now. guess what? We now have the soft skills side of this as well.
I like that. And you started to touch base on my next question, talking about why soft skills and why now, right? But you've got me thinking, here on campus, right, we have our nursing department and they have a full sim lab on one of the floors, right? A full nursing physical lab. They have animatage tables for virtual dissection. That's a physical table in the classroom. P-Tech, we have an entire lab of P-Tech for lockout, tagout, and everything else involved there. And the conversations then become, well, we're really popular with our technical skills, but our students are getting out there and not interviewing correctly or not interviewing well. That would be the better way to put that,
Yeah.
right? And so I guess from y'all's platform, if you could talk a little bit about some of the tools that are offered that benefit real world examples by using y'all's VR AR tools.
So that would directly relate to our interview scenario, which is, and let me take a step back. So Ovation started with supporting folks who wanted to improve their speeches, right? People thought of us as the public speaking trainer, and speeches were our focus. And with the introduction of AI dialogue, we then expanded quite dramatically horizontally to different scenarios: medical exams, interrogation, for criminal justice students, and of course, interviews. Now, the way interviews work in Ovation is you are seated across, there's two of them. There's either an interview or a panel interview, right, where you have multiple AI interviewers. And you set what your job title is you're applying for, the company name that you're applying at, how long you want the interview to be. You provide your resume to give the AI context on who you are. And then the AI interviewer starts asking you questions relevant to that job. And AI has gotten so good now that there are transcripts of, let's say, Microsoft interviews floating around on the internet that the AI has consumed during training at some point. And so you can feel pretty confident that the questions that are going to be asked in Ovation of you during an interview resemble the questions that are going to be asked if you were to apply at Microsoft or Apple or some other company. And so, setting students up to interview well is a big part of what colleges need to do. Right? You, of course, need to teach them the skills, but you also need to get them a job afterwards. And so Ovation now can really help by, for example, simulating a mock interview where a nurse is interviewing with a hospital, for example, and asking all of the relevant questions for that role. And one of the real big things here is that schools often have career services departments where they will do mock interviews. Of course, they have employees in the career services department who can do that. But it's quite tricky to do that for the broad range of roles that students at a university might want, right? You may have a career services employee who's pretty good at nursing interviews, but knows nothing about, for example, going into, let's say, logistics or some totally unrelated field, right? At that point, they're sort of falling back to general questions like, what's your biggest weakness? What's your biggest strength? And so, the AI coming in and asking the questions that are relevant to the job is a very powerful way to help these students prepare properly for an actual interview.
I like that. And so that's a good transition into this last real question. Let's talk about outcomes and accessibility, right? What kind of impacts are you seeing from institutions and learners in general that are using Ovation? And how do you ensure this type of immersive training remains accessible and scalable?
We're seeing pilots turn into small deployments, turn into large deployments, and for a number of reasons. The students absolutely love immersive education, right? It's not a textbook. It's something that they can experience. It's something that they can do to learn. It's a new way to learn. Now this wasn't the case 5-10 years ago, but now most, if not all, students have had their head in a VR headset. and so they're not as unfamiliar anymore. And when they see an application in this VR headset that they're more comfortable with, that ties directly to helping them, learn some topic they've been struggling with, or get a job that they've wanted, or had their eye on through undergrad or grad school, it's very exciting to them. So they provide that feedback to the faculty, who then provide that feedback to me in the form of, we'd like to expand our deployment with Ovation. And so that's kind of the impact I'm seeing. It's just, they love it and they want to use it more. And we've been around a while. As I said, we actually started the company officially in 2016. So we've been here a while. We've integrated lots and lots of feedback. Each year, 2 semesters a year. Each one is an opportunity to kind of run a research on what's working in the software and what's not, what needs to improve. And so we've rolled that into the software and iterated for many semesters now. And part of that is, to your accessibility point, is not everybody wants to use a VR headset. Not everybody has one. Not everybody can afford one. And so we made the decision to make Ovation compatible with computers, with Windows computers now, and with more in the future, so that they can be used at home on a student's computer, right? They don't need to be in a VR lab on campus to benefit from Ovation. And again, they don't need to be in a VR headset to benefit from Ovation. They can engage in dialogue with the AI on their monitor and still get a lot of the advantages of that. So that's one way we've sort of made it accessible, and also that directly ties to scalable as well, right? Because on the VR side, you're limited to how many VR headsets do you have, right? How many facilitators do you have to support these VR headsets, right? How many people do you need to hire to support more if you want to scale that up? And so computers, you really don't have that additional limitation. Almost everyone has one on campus, at home, and we've tried to make the application Ovation so intuitive from a user experience standpoint that you really don't need a facilitator nearby to benefit from the software.
No, it's fantastic. And I'm glad you got to touch base on the browser version of it, because my final question is if there's anything you'd like to add. And that's something that I really, really like about y'all's platform, is that you've opened it up like that. So kudos on that decision for what that's worth. And I do honestly, Jeff, want to ask, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Probably the only thing I would add is that I get a pretty good look at the trajectory of VR in education from where I sit, as you might imagine. And there is a hockey stick moment right now, in the sense that schools really are realizing that immersive education is a big part of the future of education. And they are putting more and more resources towards figuring out, what is my VR play? How am I making this available to my students and improving their education? And a lot of people talk about AI being a big part of the future of education, and we happen to be in a fortunate spot where we're sort of VR plus AI. We're a combination of the two. But I wouldn't sleep on the VR component of that, especially when it comes to soft skills, because being immersed in a space, feeling like you're eye to eye with someone and engaging in dialogue with them in a high stakes conversation, or whatever the scenario is in the software, it's a big deal. It amplifies the learning, right? And your retention of it. And so I think it's a big deal, and I would encourage schools to make sure they have both an AI and a VR plan, and don't just kind of ignore VR going forward now that there's the shiny new AI in the room.
Love it. Once upon a time, I was basically a glorified TA for a college radio station, and I think about how we would put first semester students live on the radio. And this is just such a safer version of that. Oh my gosh. So nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to DEscussions. Brad Denison here. I've been chatting with old school video gamer from EverQuest on up into his passion and advocacy for immersive learning. It's Jeff Marshall, CEO and co-founder of Ovation. Jeff, thank you so much. And I really do hope to have an excuse to chat with you again.
My pleasure, Brad. Thanks for having me on.